Kinney. I'm the organizer of the event and the master of ceremonies for the entire event. So you're going to get tired of seeing me, but I'll try to be entertaining. Welcome. The irony of this event is I always see people that I haven't seen in a while and I want to talk to, and these next 2 days are the worst possible 2 days for me to talk to anybody because I have too much stuff to do. But so don't feel offended if I don't chit chat with all of you. I tell you, a good alternative is a chit chat with Alice. Alice Madden, the director of the Getches Wilkinson Center, will be here most of the day, all day. Well, there you go. All right. So on behalf of Alice, welcome. It's for those of you that haven't been here before, I think you'll find that this is a pretty remarkable place, and both Boulder and CU, in June especially. Except for the traffic that you're going to run into, and I'll tell you about that later. Before I head into the meat of the conference, let me acknowledge and thank a few people. First, the sponsors of this event are noted in your packet, and I think in other places around the building. And I really do want to draw attention to the sponsors. Sponsors usually cover at least half the cost of the event, and this year it's closer to 2/3 the cost of the event. And you know, to the extent we don't get sponsorships, then we have to price the event too high that people can't attend. And so we are very grateful to our sponsors. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Colorado River Research Group, who are, almost all of them are here, and most of them are on the program. Since I had them here for a meeting yesterday, I was trying to be efficient and put them on the program. If you don't know anything about the group, we have a packet of some of our information out front, which you're welcome to grab. We also have out front some other documents that I encourage you to grab. A conference announcement for the Upper Colorado River Forum. We have a job announcement for the Colorado Water Trust, and a few other things out there. So please grab those. I have to say that I've organized most of these conferences over the last 20 years, and I think this is the best lineup we've ever had. I mean, this is a pretty amazing list of speakers. And people ask me this every year, so I might as well just tell you, we don't pay our speakers. And I hope that's not news to any of our speakers here today. Sorry, Jeff. We can pay their travel costs if need be, but we don't pay our speakers. And it's and I always remember that especially when folks have to travel from out of state and take a couple days out of their life to come do this. Without getting paid, it's very much appreciated. All right. I need to thank Sean. Sean, where did you go? Sean's the logistical genius behind this event, so if you haven't interacted with Sean yet, you probably will. Yes, he knows everything about the logistics, so if he doesn't know, don't ask me because I won't know. But the logistics are pretty simple here. All the talks are in this room. All the breaks and the coffee and everything is the room next door. Most of you figured that out already. The bathrooms are down the long hallway to the left. What else about logistics? Lunch will be it's in the second floor cafeteria, which is essentially right above this room. Pretty simple. All right. Okay, let's launch into our program. It's a busy program, as you can see. We began the planning of this program about 9 months ago, and we said, gee, there's all these big important deals that are just about ready to be completed. Let's have a conference about them. And then I thought, well, it's going to be kind of old news at 9 months from now, right? You know, but we thought, well, we could still talk about the new rules and the new agreements and that sort of thing. But things have slowed down a bit, as you've noticed, which might not be good for the basin, but I think it's really good for our conference. So that's, you know. And one of the things I hope to learn this next 2 days is why the momentum seems to have slowed down a little bit. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's just the way it appears. But that's one of the things I hope to learn. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Salton Sea. And the sessions organized this morning in the order at which the issues presumably should ideally be resolved, kind of the order in which these things should fall. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but Salton Sea, for a variety of reasons that if you don't already understand why, you'll learn why now, has fallen to the kind of the front of the list of things that need to get done. So we're going to talk about the Salton Sea. I'm not going to do detailed introductions of our speakers because we have that information in the packet. The bios are in the packet. There's a lot of stuff in that packet. So I encourage you, if you don't know a speaker, to go ahead and look at those things. I know a fair number of these speakers, so where I can, I will say something embarrassing about those speakers that I do know. I Googled all the speakers as well, which is something that I haven't done before, but now I will always do because it's fascinating, not only to learn about them, but to learn about other people that share their names that have more interesting lives than themselves in some cases. So I'll share some of that information as well where appropriate. So you've all been warned. And as usual, all speakers are welcome to take the first minute of their time to rebut their introduction if necessary. So. And I think we're the only conference that officially has that policy. So maybe the only one that needs that policy. But we're going to start with Bruce. Is that what we decided? We'll start with Bruce Wilcox, who is the Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy in the California Natural Resources Agency. And I think it's telling that this position actually exists, that how important the Salton Sea is in California. He's been working on Salton Sea issues for many years. And it's just not getting any easier, I don't think, is it, Bruce? He was a key figure in setting up the QSA, which provides some critical context to the issues that we're going to talk about today. So unless I'm forgetting something, let's start with Bruce Wilcox. Bruce.
Well, I'll do the rebuttal. I think the order actually is in reverse order of accomplishment and expertise, and that's why I'm going first. It was probably too close between Michael and Kevin, but I stood out as the person that's accomplished the least amount in the amount of time I've been here. So. And now that the conference is done,
up right there.
Okay. Now that the conference is done, Monday morning we'll start working on the Salton Sea and see if we can make any accomplishments. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the background information on the Salton Sea and how it fits into some of the other things that are going on. And Michael will have more detail on that. He's been involved in the Salton Sea for a long time, and I'm sure Kevin will have more detail on that too. They put this presentation together for me, and I'm not the animated guy, so I've got to have all this stuff here at the same time to look at. Here are some of the state requirements under the SSMP. There was legislation passed several years ago, 15 years ago, about restoration at the Salton Sea as part of the QSA. There's contractual obligations that the state of California has under the QSA with mitigation requirements, picking up the cost of mitigation after a certain amount of money is expended by the three water agencies that form the QSA JPA. Section 2940 of the Fish and Game Code talks about how the requirements that we have for managing the wildlife population. And then about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, the governor, in response to to a petition that IID filed with the State Water Board, formed a Salton Sea Task Force. That Salton Sea Task Force is made up of different members of the different agencies at the state of California. I'm a member. Governor's office has members on it. So does CARB and other agencies. Those agencies are the ones that put together the requirements or the goals for the Salton Sea mitigation program. And then finally, there is an MOU between California Natural Resource Agency and the Department of Interior, recognizing the requirements for air quality and recognizing that we both have an obligation at the Salton Sea. One of the things that we discovered pretty early on in the process was, while there was an EIS that outlined a plan for the Salton Sea, it was $9 billion in 2008 dollars, and there was no way that plan would ever successfully get implemented. It was too ambitious. It was a great idea, and it may have worked back in if the economy would have kept chugging along like it was in 2006 and 2007, but of course the economy didn't. The state of California didn't have $9 to $10 billion to outlay on that restoration program. So for the longest time, the restoration program sort of languished. IID stepped forward a few years ago and developed the Salton Sea Restoration and Renewable Energy Initiative, a lot of which is in the plan that we're currently proposing at the state. That was sort of the impetus for that, and the petition was the impetus for the state to get moving on developing a plan, and developing a plan that was incremental and a plan that phased over time. The idea behind that was we don't have to have all the money up front. We can build habitat, we can build dust control measures, we can do other things with a certain amount of money that we've got, and then as we get more money, we can continue. So it's both incremental and phased over that time frame. Out of that grew the need for a short-term plan, and I think the term of art right now is a plan that has some durable funding attached to it. And funding is always an issue in these projects, and it will continue to be an issue in this project. But we're developing a 10-year plan. We have a draft out for comment that includes some of the funding requirements and some of the funding ideas we have. I'll touch on some of those ideas at the end of this presentation. But the 10-year plan, right now, we will be working on a work plan for that, an implementation process and schedule for that, and you'll see in a minute when some of that's scheduled. And we're required to develop additional management strategies out of that plan. So the plan outlines the incremental approach, it outlines the stepped approach, and we'll look a little bit at the plan itself in a minute. Pardon me. For those of you who either have worked for the state or work for any of the federal agencies, you can't do anything without an org chart. This is one version of our org chart. I apologize for the quality of the slide. I had to steal it off the internet last night. The way we're set up is a series of projects that are going forward, advisory committees that advise us on different processes in those projects when we present them, local stakeholders, Salton Sea Authority, the landowners and the QSA partners, Imperial Irrigation District, Coachella Valley Water District, San Diego County Water Authority. And that all rolls up to the Assistant Secretary position, my position, which answers to the Governor's Task Force, or the Salton Sea Task Force, answers to the Water Resources Control Board, and answers to the Air Resources Board. And all of that answers, of course, to the Governor of California. We're in the process of reevaluating the committee structure. We had a meeting earlier. What's today? Tuesday? Thursday? Oh, great. Only one day till the weekend. We had a meeting earlier this week that where we looked at some of the advisory committees and how they might be better structured. This is a bit of a learning process for us too, moving forward. But the idea was we would have people in positions in these committees that understood what was going on in that particular area, and that means to a large extent we would have people from IID, Coachella Valley Water District, the two counties, et cetera, working the leads on those committees. You'll notice Jessica Lavecchio is the air quality lead from Imperial Irrigation District. They have a very robust air quality management program. Some of the other leaders, Phil Johnson is with Salton Sea Authority. Environmental compliance is out of DWR. And the Salton Sea Authority has been very helpful in coordinating and moving all this forward too. Along the bottom are the projects that we'll talk about for just a minute: Red Hill Bay, Torres Martinez, and species conservation habitat. So the current projects are located around the rivers, and that's because that's where the water comes in. It's easier to harvest water off of those areas. It's agricultural return flow water, drain water. And that's where the first projects will be located. The first projects are also proposed to start in 2018 or completed in 2018 or 2019. Red Hill Bay has started. That's a project we'll talk about in a second. New River West is in the design phases right now, and so is the stuff on the Whitewater River. This is just the New River east and west sides to give you an idea of where this is the southwest corner of the Salton Sea. And one of the reasons for choosing this area is already permitted, has CEQA and NEPA completed on it, and we can move forward. So the purple lines you see are the actual species conservation habitat project, which is a deeper water habitat, 6 to 10 feet deep, that we hope will replicate fish habitat at the Salton Sea. As you'll hear later from Michael, I think the fishery is in trouble at the Salton Sea because of the salinity primarily, and the salinity is about 60 parts per thousand, and that's when we start to see reproduction issues with the fishery. So it's very important for us to get some of this habitat on the ground as soon as we can. The other thing, of course, is the habitat also functions as pretty good air quality mitigation. If it's wet, it doesn't blow as much. And then the final reason for putting it here is we want to coordinate with the geothermal. The southern end of the Salton Sea is a very rich geothermal area. And IID has worked with us, as have some of the geothermal companies, to try to put together a program that recognizes the need for developing that geothermal, and even certainly won't preclude the development of that geothermal, and might even help in the long run on that geothermal. So species conservation habitat is ready to advertise. We've got a couple small issues to deal with on easements and a couple of other things. This project has been underway for quite a while. We learned quite a few things on this from this project from a state's perspective on how we do contracting, and more importantly, how we don't do contracting. And this project, we hope, will provide fish habitat. It will be kind of a pilot project test of what additional habitat we're going to provide at the sea. This is the Red Hill Bay project. This is a project that IID stepped up on. It's funded by the state of California. IID's been working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Sonny Bono National Wildlife Refuge. This area is highly emissive. That white crust you see on the photo there is a real fine salt dust, blows around in about a 3 or 4 knot wind. And it's one of the areas we targeted early as having to figure out a way to deal with that kind of dust emissions. So you can really divide the dust emissions into this very fine particulate matter and then the heavier sand. But all of them are PM10, but the heavier sands. And we haven't got a lot of good ways to deal with this other than to flood it. So it also would provide habitat then. So right now that project is underway. We're working to solve some lease issues on that. The easements and the lease issues are an interesting problem in that a lot of the mineral rights, which includes the geothermal rights for the parcels, are separated from the parcel itself in the deeds, and one owner might have the underground lease or the underground ownership, and another owner might have the surface ownership. So it's taken a while to get this process down. IID's been incredibly helpful on moving forward with this. Most of this is IID property. We meet with them every 2 weeks to work through easement issues and other issues. And if I've learned one thing so far in this position, it's that we have to have that kind of coordination between the agencies to move this forward. This project, we're going to see if we can get it done by the end of this year. That's pushing it pretty hard, but we'll see what we can do. It would be shallow water habitat. So it'd be 0 to maybe 3 foot deep at the deepest points, I imagine. And it used to be great bird habitat and will be again as soon as we flood this area. Now, this project and the Species Conservation Habitat Project are part of the SSMP, and they're designed into that program. Torres Martinez is on the north end of the Salton Sea off the Whitewater River, and that's the series of wetlands. You see those rectangular cells or treatment cells. Those will be refurbished and used to treat the water out of the Whitewater River, although the Whitewater River has pretty good water quality to start with. And then the area, that kind of strange-shaped area down on the bottom there, is an area that we will turn into deeper water habitat for fisheries. That project is about 2/3 of the way completed. The next phase of it, which is a Proposition 1 project, or Prop 1 water bond funded project, will probably start later this year. Let's talk for just a minute about the 10-year plan, the overview, and how we're going to get through this process. The work plan, we talked about this at the meeting earlier this week. The work plan will be developed over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. We'll take those committees that you saw earlier, or some variant of those committees, and work closely with them over that time frame to get the necessary information from them. But the idea is to concentrate phase 1, or the 10-year plan, on construction. We want to build as much habitat and air quality as we possibly can in that 10-year period, and we'd like it all to be wildlife habitat if we can make that work. We'll also come up with a projected cost and funding. And as I said earlier, there's always issues with that. I think right now we're at the cost of the plan is about $390 million, right around that neighborhood, of which we have 60 or 80 million in total, so we're considerably short. We'll talk about some of the other funding opportunities at the end. The program also has to be adaptive in some manner, so that as we move forward and learn things from the projects we construct, we can go on to other projects and not make those same mistakes again. And then the outreach portion is that we promise to be very transparent in this project and have a series of ongoing public outreach meetings, which we're in the process of. Very important to us, and I think to the water agencies too, that this get built, particularly the water backbone, get built in a manner that fits into the IID system. The IID drainage system drains the entire valley. Most of it comes to the 2 rivers on the south end, the New River and the Alamo River, and then ends up in the Salton Sea. So if we're taking agricultural return flow water off of those 2 rivers to use for habitat, we need to be able to assure IID that our design standards meet their design standards, so we don't build something that will fail later on and impact IID's ability to use the drainage system. This is just a graph of what we think, at least right now, will be wet habitat, almost right at 30,000 acres by 2028. And then the dust control and dry habitat is needed. Some of this area won't even be a missive and won't require treatment. Some of it will be access roads for the geothermal. Some of it will be berms that are constructed for the wet habitat. So it's not like that gap there is going to have nothing done to it. It's just that we don't anticipate putting wet habitat on everything. So the key components are New River East and West, the Whitewater River, the Alamo River, North and South. And I talked about the priorities already, and I talked about the water delivery infrastructure. And IID, again, has stepped up to help develop that water delivery infrastructure. And over the course of the next couple of months, we'll be bringing design criteria to them to look at to see how best to do that. So in of priorities, this is the first area we're looking at. It's on the west side of the river. You saw it a minute ago. The orange blob is species conservation habitat. The rest of this is what will be built in 2018 to 2023 as habitat, wet habitat. The yellow is the water management pond. The water management ponds will take water off the rivers, probably by pump off the rivers, and build up enough head and pressure that we can gravity feed out across the playa. They'll also be deep enough, we hope, to be able to provide fishery habitat, so there will be kind of a multiple use from those areas. We're a little unsure on the fish habitat, and we're working on some models right now to see how that works, and then, of course, as we build this first water management pond, we'll be able to see how that works. But one of the most critical factors out there right now is deeper water habitat or fish habitat for the piscivorous fish-eating birds. So this is phase one. This is phase two. The other thing we're looking at right now is whether or not we should move forward with building more of the infrastructure now, the backbone infrastructure now, and concentrate on the habitat and the air quality a little later. It's conceivable that we could build both the yellow and the yellow-black striped areas, which are the water management ponds, roughly at the same time. That would give us water management infrastructure for that site until 2028, and then we can build habitat as we move forward. The water management system is the more expensive part of the system, so the idea would be to get as much of that in as we could, and then as we harvest smaller amounts of funding from different sources, we can put more habitat on the ground. It also would help from the process, at least could help with the fisheries habitat, because the more of those areas we put in, the better. The other thing to tell you, as you can see from the graphic here, is that this is just phase one. It goes through 2028. We have to come up with a reasonable plan that goes much longer than that. And you can see that this does a fairly good job of covering what will be exposed in that time frame on the north and the south ends. But we have to, as part of this project, as we get construction started, we'll spend some time looking at what else we need to do. So that's the first area on the, see, they should never let, the first area, pardon me, the first area is to the south or to the west of the river. Area 2 is up at Torres Martinez. It will probably be a couple of those water management ponds we talked about. Area 3 is back down next to the species conservation habitat. We'll use species conservation habitat as a water reservoir for the habitat we're building in Area 3. Area 4 and 5 are probably the last areas we'll build in, and that's because we need to do more work with the local geothermal companies, development companies, to better understand what they need. We've worked with a couple of them, Controlled Thermal, Cal Energy, and we've got a pretty good idea of what they need, but that's the really hot areas for geothermal, and we wanted to have some more time to work on that. I will say that Area 4 is an area we're going to look at. It has some existing habitat in it, primarily marshbird habitat, rail habitat. But it seems to function fairly well, and if there is a way that we can combine building access roads for the geothermal that are the same roads that we're going to use for berms to bleed water off into those areas, we want to be able to do that. So that area will rise to a level of evaluating the existing habitat in the next, probably in the next 6 months. A real preliminary construction design, construction schedule, sorry. Nothing too remarkable. It staggers the starts. Again, we may look at the Alamo River North a little earlier in the project. Here's the 10-year implementation strategy. I won't bore everybody with all of those. A couple of ones that we think are very important. Establishing and perhaps improving access for geothermal, evaluating existing habitat and how we might be able to use that for dust control and or habitat, and the air quality projects, of course, and then the habitat itself. I'm an ecologist by training, so I lean towards habitat as a solution to everything. But we want to build as much habitat as we possibly can. We're required to build habitat under the Fish and Game Code. So a better way to look at this is a draft plan for the phase one in late summer, the next workshops, which will be held in Imperial Valley in the early fall. We'll have a comment period and the final invitation planned by the end of 2017. That's a pretty ambitious schedule. We hope to be able to stay on track for that. Available funding, real quickly, water bond is $80 million. From the state of California, Proposition 1 water bond, we have that money. We have Proposition 50 money from Wildlife Conservation Board. They are helping fund Red Hill Bay. They're helping fund species conservation habitat. And they've helped with other projects too. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we have a USDA grant as a partner with Salton Sea Authority and IID to look at constructed wetlands for water quality. And here are some of the potential funding sources. The Water Transfer Joint Powers Authority is something we're looking at. We need to make sure that we use that funding in a manner that addresses the mitigation more than the habitat, but we're looking at using some of that funding. The DOI CNRA Memorandum of Understanding. In the last year, we've had the philanthropic organizations step up and help with a lot of different things. We're talking to them right now about funding a position to help with the air quality stuff. Water Resource Development Act funding. We have a consultant who's paid for by the philanthropic organizations who has done an amazing amount of work in getting us plugged into a lot of the federal programs. Additional USDA partnerships and funding, and of course, additional state and local funding. There's two bills in the legislature right now that deal with the Salton Sea. So that's a brief overview. That's how you can get a hold of me. I usually return calls within a couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. We will let each presenter present, and then we will take questions as a group after that. Is Mike going second? Mike, are you going second? Looks that way. All right, I'm going to introduce Mike then. Well, I've spoken with Bruce and Kevin on the phone. I've known Mike for a long time, probably 20 years or so. So I can tell you a little bit more about Mike. He's a senior associate at the Pacific Institute, and has been there a long time. I must say, when I first met Mike, this is the sort of introduction you get if you know me. When I first met Mike, probably 20 years ago, I thought to myself, this guy's a little weird. And I thought that because he was working on the Salton Sea. And, well, primarily, I mean, he easily is a little weird anyway, but the Salton Sea, and I thought, wow, Salton Sea, why would anyone, it's not that big of a deal. And I've learned a lot over the years about the Salton Sea, and most of it from Mike. And so I have to begrudgingly acknowledge that Mike's taught me a lot. But he is still a little weird. So, but in a nutty, charming, friendly sort of way, not a let's add him to the watch list sort of way. So when you Google Mike's name, by the way, I don't know if you've done this, Mike. One of the first things that come up, it says, and I will quote Google, and if it's on the internet, it's true. One of the first things that comes up, it says, Mike Cohen works as a spokesperson for U.S. President Donald Trump. And I thought that will be incredibly helpful at our conference today. So Mike, speak away.
So I thought the more important Michael Cohen was the one who was the director of the Department of Finance in the state of California. I was looking to play that card at some point when the budget got a little too tight and just put in a call saying, this is Michael Cohen and we need to loosen up a couple $100 million for the state. But he just retired, or resigned, so I'm not able to play that. But so here's the federal government perspective on the Salton Sea. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Salton Sea in context, more broadly about the Colorado River and how the Salton Sea plays a part in the Colorado River, which I think is of greater interest, particularly here in the Upper Basin. What we do in the state of California in particular, what it does at the Salton Sea can affect Lake Mead, can affect Lake Powell, and the system reliability as a whole. So I work for the Pacific Institute nominally. And in fact, my office is just across the street, at least, again, nominally. So here's the Salton Sea. And it's important for a couple reasons to have a slide up. One, because I think geography is always important. And geography is, I think, particularly important for the Salton Sea because it's way down at the end of the system. So the Salton Sea essentially collects and concentrates all the activities, the salts, the selenium, and then some of the fertilizers and pesticides that are applied more regionally at the Salton Sea. So those constituents and contaminants concentrated at the Salton Sea. But often we talk about paper water when we talk about the Colorado River system. So the Salton Sea is in many ways a virtual choke point for the Colorado system as a whole, and particularly within the state of California. So we saw that with the QSA, that figuring out a way that the QSA can move forward, that water transfer from IID to San Diego County can move forward, the largest water transfer, ag to urban water transfer in the country, can move forward, was really challenged by what those impacts would be at the Salton Sea. And as Bruce mentioned briefly, the state couldn't really figure out a solution. In fact, none of us could really figure out a solution as there was a lot of pressure on the state to come up with that deal. So they kicked the can down the road. They said, we'll give you 15 years to figure out a solution. This was back in 2003. And in fact, 2003 was the first year. So essentially we're in the 15th year now of what that 15-year plan was. And the stopgap measure was, IID, you need to follow additional land. You need to put additional farmers and agricultural suppliers out of work for 15 years so we can deliver water to make up for the impacts, at least the salinity impacts, at the Salton Sea while we're coming up with a solution. That was the deal. So here we are, 6 months from that mitigation water ending and essentially hitting that tipping point. And again, we're back now because Doug's finally realized that the Salton Sea actually is important. And how do we address that issue so that not only California can continue to meet its 4.4 obligation, but that the system as a whole, that these broader structural deficit questions at Lake Mead, the continuing discussions about the DCP, how do those move forward if we can't address the problems at the Salton Sea? So quick overview, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state's roles and obligations, and then why the Salton Sea is so important just within the region itself, particularly about air quality and the ecological health of the region, what's been done to date, and then a little bit about the disconnect that we're seeing between this impending deadline and state activities, and then some potential solutions. So as Bruce mentioned briefly, there's statutory language saying it's the intent of the state of California to restore the Salton Sea and permanently protect fish and wildlife resources there. And then in the EIR that Bruce mentioned that came out almost 11 years ago now, it gives these three key goals, really. Protecting aquatic and shoreline habitat, eliminating dust or dust control measures, and protecting water quality. But then when we look at this 10-year plan that came out 3 months ago, right, this is the state's plan that Bruce mentioned. Here's the closest thing they have to a goal in that plan. Address playa exposure. So that was a draft plan. They're working on revising that plan. We heard some new comments from Bruce today, even new from Monday. So the plan is very much a work in progress. But this is what it says. Playa exposure. So Bruce talked a lot more about habitat, but when you start digging into this plan, it causes us a great deal of concern because there's not a lot to talk explicitly about how much habitat's going to be constructed there. Or more broadly, what are the goals and objectives of this program? What is the Salton Sea Management Program really designed to do? That hasn't been explained. So how do we start adaptively managing once we get those projects on the ground to reach some goal if there's no real goal set? So this is the language from the state order. The state board back in 2002 had to approve the water transfer. And in it, it said there's essentially a balance that needs to occur between protecting the state's fish and wildlife resources, protecting the economy of Imperial County, and the state's broader interest in meeting California's water supply needs. So I think particularly this conference and a lot of the interest in the past year or so has been really focused on that third part. And I would even expand that it's broader than just California's water supply needs. It's the water supply needs of the Colorado River Basin as a whole. So here's California's consumptive use. This is just from Reclamation's Secretary County reports, and this year's the forecast over time. And you can see through 2002, California was well over its normal year entitlement. Completely within the law, of course, because it was using unused apportionment, or by that point, taking water out of storage. But California was up to 5.3 in 2002. And those of us who have been around for a number of years remember that back in 2000, 2001, 2002, there was a lot of talk about the soft landing. We needed to get those surplus criteria in place so that California could ease down from 5.3 to 4.4. Of course, California went from 5.3 to 4.4 in 1 year. 2002 to 2003, that was the soft landing. So you can see that IID's use has declined over time from their normal year entitlement of 3.1 down to about 2.5 these year. Last year and this year, the forecast is about the same. And then Metropolitan, serving some 19 million people on the Southern California coastline, was using 1.2, even as much as 1.3 million acre feet. Dropped down again in 2003 to help meet that 4.4 soft landing. And has been using additional water because of transfers from IID from a pre-existing 1988 agreement, and then from water from Palo Verde, a lot of innovative ICS agreements. So additional water has been flowing through that aqueduct. But again, the interesting thing here is this year, the projection, at least the forecast, is that Metropolitan's can be under 500,000 acre feet, which is great news for the Colorado River system. But that efficiency, of course, comes at a cost. And what has happened is, as less water is used in the Salton Sea Basin, less water flows into the Salton Sea, which essentially is the sump for those agricultural return flows, and the elevation declines. So that's what this GS graph shows from 2000 almost to the present, that the Salton Sea, the elevation of the Salton Sea has dropped about 7 feet over that period of time. So roughly a half-foot decline per year. So this forecast, based on modeling from 11 years ago, which seems to be pretty accurate to date, shows, again, that slight decline on the far left in that yellowish gradual change period. But again, we're hitting that tipping point, right? 6 months from now, that mitigation water goes away. So the Salton Sea, which is currently getting about 1.1 million acre feet of inflow, is going to get about 200,000 acre feet less next year. That's a year-to-year decline. So what we're going to see is the rate of change of the Salton Sea is really going to accelerate. And the Salton Sea, which has been dropping by about a half a foot per year, is going to drop by closer to 1.5 feet per year. So in a 10 to 12 year period, this rapid change period, Salton Sea elevation is going to decline by about 20 feet. Salinity is going to triple. Right? That's a really rapid rate of change. And although we can pick a point in any one of those salinities where we can say, look, there's a lot of brine shrimp and brine flies at Mona Lake or at the Great Salt Lake, the rate of change may be so rapid that species are going to have a hard time getting a toehold there and adapting to create the food resources that the birds require to feed. So not only are we going to see a lot of playa exposed, but pretty dramatic ecological impacts. So here's a different way of looking at that change. The darker blue is where the Salton Sea was back in 2000, 2003, at elevation about minus 228. The lighter blue is actually a little higher than where the Salton Sea is right now. It's actually dropped a little bit faster than some of those earlier projections. And then this tomato soup Salton Sea is where the Salton Sea is projected to be in these 15 years or so. So that's exposing more than 100 square miles, as much as 150 square miles of playa. So I think Kevin might speak a little bit about some of the air quality issues, but that's the major concern right now is what happens to human health. So one of the things to keep in mind is the air quality in Imperial and Coachella valleys is already bad. Right? Both areas are in non-attainment for state and federal air quality standards. And then we're going to have all this new playa exposed, which is going to kick up a lot of dust, which means a bad situation is going to get that much worse. And there's a number of pretty bad health outcomes associated with this dust, this PM10 and dust. Of course, the most vulnerable populations are the hardest hit, but a lot of people out there are already seeing an increased incidence of asthma. And again, that's going to get worse. The other context here is that California's already lost 90%, 95% of its wetlands. Its Central Valley has been developed, the Colorado River Delta has been developed, The Salton Sea Basin's been developed. Wetlands that frequently were found there, those wetlands have been changed, often to agriculture, or now it's increasingly to residential developments or urban developments more broadly. So there's just not that many other places for the birds to go. So sometimes I hear, well, whatever, the Salton Sea is a fake system anyway, it's an accidental sea, who cares, dry it up. The problem is these birds don't have any other places to go. It's not like there's just empty wetlands out there just waiting for birds to show up. Those birds are using those existing wetlands. So as there's fewer and fewer wetlands, those birds become more concentrated. There's fewer food resources for any of them. And then as their populations are concentrated, disease incidence goes up as well. And it's important to keep in mind how incredibly important the Salton Sea is as a resource for birds. Right? More than 420 different species of birds have been found at and around the Salton Sea. It's the second highest bird count in the continental U.S. And huge numbers of many of these individual species. So huge diversity, huge abundance. So a couple interesting pictures or pretty pictures of birds just to see what we're going to lose. So what happens if we fail to act or fail to take sufficient action? Well, the sea is going to change dramatically, as I've noted. Really high human healthcare costs, and likely a lot of air quality litigation, because under existing guidelines from the Imperial County, the landowner is responsible for dust blowing off that land. So as the sea shrinks, more of that land's exposed. A lot of that's IID land, some of that's other property owners, some of it's federal government owned. There's going to be some challenges to determine who actually owns the land, because that title's not always clear. And then who's responsible for, who are those landowners going to go after for saying, oh, my land's now exposed, why should I have to pay for this? So that's why the state was supposed to backstop this deal, but it doesn't look as though those projects are going to get on the ground fast enough. So there could be a lot of litigation, particularly if we don't see implementation moving at a rapid enough rate. And one of the other real challenges here is that there's a real difference between who's responsible to pay and who's going to bear the cost if no action is taken. And that is, I think, one of the more frustrating conundrums, and perhaps the big legal challenge here is, how do we get the state of California to meet its obligations? Because the state of California failing to meet its obligations doesn't mean that there's no cost. It simply means somebody else bears those costs. And that somebody else is the roughly 650,000 people in the Imperial and Coachella valleys, who are going to pay in the form of much degraded health and having to go to the hospital more often, lost work days, it's declining property values, it's potentially some degradation in agricultural productivity, and then there's associated costs with species, these non-use values. So as we're losing more and more of these species, or at least individuals of these species, that carries a cost as well. So there's a trade-off here. And Bruce mentioned the cost of this preferred alternative that came out in 2007 as being on the order of $9 to $10 billion. But I put out a report a couple of years ago saying, well, what's the cost of not taking action? And based on some estimates on other areas, that may be $29 to $70 billion over 30 years. So there's a real trade-off here. It's not that if we don't do anything, it doesn't cost us anything. It's if we don't do anything, somebody else pays, and that's the people who live in the region as well as the species themselves. So progress to date. This is a picture of Red Hill Bay. There was a ribbon cutting at Red Hill Bay, I think it was December of 2015. Here's what we've got so far. They've put out a pipeline because one of the challenges with the Salton Sea is how you mix the water to prevent increased vectors in terms of mosquitoes transmitting diseases, as well as trying to control some of that selenium pathway. So here's what we've got so far. 0 acres have been constructed. 0 acres of habitat have been constructed. We knew this was coming, right? 2002, 2003, we started this process. 2007, there was this preferred alternative that had a $9 billion price tag, but part of that was the no regrets activities. And there was consensus, at least on these no regrets activities, that we needed to get some habitat on the ground, to get some things going out there so we could start saying what works, what doesn't work, what are the impacts to species of building habitat out of the Salton Sea. But here's what we have. 0. So that's the disconnect, right? Here's the schedule that the state submitted to the legislature last April. And at the bottom, it shows the amount of ply exposure. I'm not showing the salinity trends here, but you get a sense that things are moving a little slowly. And in fact, species conservation habitat that Bruce mentioned, which really originally was one of these no regrets activities, was initially scoped in 2009. The EIR was certified in 2013. There is yet to be an acre of habitat constructed at species conservation habitat. Now the start date is pushed out possibly to early next year. So we're going to see thousands of acres of additional ply exposed. Maybe Redhill Bay will be operational by the end of this year. That's my hope. Towards Martinez wetlands, basically what they need to do there is sink a pump into the ground and start putting some water out in these existing habitat cells. But what we have again is this huge disconnect between the end of mitigation water flows, this tipping point at the Salton Sea, and what's actually happening on the ground. So here's the same slide that Bruce just showed you. Here's the 10-year plan implementation strategy. And take a look at this language for a moment. So we've got a lot of developing and evaluating and refining. But it's not until you get to the bottom when there's anything to talk about planning and implementation. So Bruce mentioned the importance of the infrastructure backbone, and I'm encouraged to hear that because I see that really as foundational to getting these projects going. If the state is really serious about doing something in the Salton Sea, they need to get a water management system out there on the ground fast so you can start tearing projects off of that. But what we have is this. Right? You read that and you think, well, we got plenty of time. We got 15 years to go. That's fine. Except we have 6 months and we're talking about developing design criteria. And you might sense a hint of frustration. It's hard for me to articulate the frustration, right? This came out 2 years ago. Bruce himself did it. IID and Bruce put together this SSRR-EI 2 years ago. And then a year ago, IID spent $500,000 to further refine that design for that backbone. There's a document. That wasn't ready to build, but that was again a year ago that they had this document in hand. And now what we're looking at is continued designing the criteria. Right? There's this complete disconnect between what's happening on the ground, the loss of water, the loss of this mitigation water, what's going to happen at the Salton Sea, and what the state's doing. So we do have a couple encouraging things. They're going to actually implement some air quality projects because they better. I'm not sure what they're going to build harbor and ancillary facilities for because there's not really going to be much out there. But at least there's a couple things that they're talking about doing things. But the rest of it is this kind of nebulous language, which 15 years ago would have been great, but now it just looks like off-ramps. So here again is another slide we just saw. This came out on Monday. Okay, we're going to have a comment period and then the final implementation plan at the end of this year. But the end of this year is when the mitigation water goes away. This is the inflection point, right? And instead what we have is the plan's going to be ready. And of course, we've missed those deadlines year after year. So again, I was encouraged to hear about the backbone infrastructure, but I don't see it. Right, here's the construction schedule, and there's nothing in there. There's in the 10-year plan, there's some discussion of this backbone, again, this foundational element, but it's not described. And when we look at the construction schedule, it's not in there. So some of my optimism is faded. Right? Again, where's the urgency? So fortunately, here's the happy part. Solutions.
There's a happy part?
So the challenge with most of these restoration projects in the West is there's no water, right? San Joaquin River restoration, we're going to hear later about the Colorado River Delta. The real challenge is how do we acquire additional water to make something happen? Good news is, Salton Sea, there's going to be 700,000, maybe 500,000, maybe even down to 400,000 acre feet of water flowing into the Salton Sea. 400 to 500,000 acre feet is a staggering amount of water. We could do tremendous things with that much water. We just need to manage it. We need to build that backbone infrastructure to spread it out, get it to where those habitat cells are, and do good things with it. So we have the water to make something happen. There's pretty broad consensus, at least again on these no regrets activities from even 10 years ago. What do we need to make happen? Well, get some of those habitat projects out on the ground, get those dust control projects out on the ground. Funding, well, Bruce said we don't have full funding, but we do have some funding. There's $80 million in the current budget to get something going, which is certainly enough to get some of these projects going. And species conservation habitat is fully funded, right? That's $30 million plus in the bank, ready to go. They just need to start cutting some checks. This MOU that was signed last year, the federal government promised, we'll see how that holds up, to contribute another $20 million for O&M funding. There's some potential funding from the philanthropic community. There's some other money going in. There's already another $7.5 million to the Salton Sea Authority, some additional projects. So we're talking over $100 million in the bank right now that isn't being spent. So we certainly don't have the full amount of money that's going to be required to make something happen, but we do have money to get things going. And the good thing about the Salton Sea is that you can get things going over time. You can phase these projects in. It's not that we have to build it all at once. We're not building a dam here. We're building a series of habitat cells and dust control projects. And to do that, you simply chase the shoreline. So what we need to do is funding year after year. And once we can start getting some projects on the ground, we can go back to the legislature and say, look, here's what you get for your money. There's tons of birds there. It works well. We need some additional funding for next year. And when you have something to demonstrate, it's that much easier to get the funding. But instead, we're saying, well, we don't have the full funding now, so we're not sure how far we can go. And there's a lot of off-ramps within this 10-year plan talking about contingency planning in the eventuality that there's not sufficient funding. That doesn't give us a lot of comfort either. So Bruce has only been on the job a year and a half. So clearly this is not all on Bruce. And in fact, Bruce essentially is one guy at DWR working hard with him. But the rest of the state of California has not made this a priority. So there's a lot of focus on the Big Delta, that other choke point in California, and a lot of staff working at DWR and the Resources Agency on Big Delta issues, and a lot of funding going towards that. But we're not seeing the support for this program at the governor's office that this program needs. And we hear a little bit about the long-term commitment, but what we have now is a 10-year plan and some kind of vague language about, oh, we're going to look at what happens after that. This water transfer runs potentially through 2077. This is not a 10-year water transfer. We've got another 60 years to go on this water transfer. We need some parallel effort at the Salton Sea to make sure the whole thing doesn't blow up. All right, so I was less happy there. I'm trying to get back to the happy. So here's the general idea of what we're talking about here. This is, again, is what came out 2 years ago. It's this water infrastructure backbone. The idea generally is you collect the water from the rivers and the less selenium heavy drains. You put it in these reservoirs, you spread it out, and then you put it in these ponds. And some of it's dust control projects. In fact, there was habitat construction at the Salton Sea by the Bureau of Reclamation and the USGS. From 2006 to 2010, there was 100 acres of these habitat ponds. More than 200 different species of birds were observed there. These were hugely successful ponds. They operated for about 5 years. And then Reclamation said, we had a 5-year commitment, we funded it, and we're going to now turn it over to the state. And the state said, oh, we can't come up with $500,000 a year to continue to operate these plants, and they dried them up. So we've actually moved backwards from where we were. We had 100 acres of ponds out there, and they dried up. When they dried them up, they found over 1 million desert pupfish, an endangered species, in these ponds. Happy's hard for me. So to bring this back to the Colorado River, the next step here is, how do we do this next increment? What happens next at the Colorado River is we address the structural deficit at Meade. And you can see there on this California total that they're talking about 350,000 acre feet in potential reductions from the state of California. Some 60% of that to come from IID, assuming everybody's happy and signs this thing. So we had a good year in the basin. But as the forecasts have continued over the year, we've seen less and less of that runoff occur. Because a lot of that snow is simply sublimating. We're not getting the runoff. And this is exactly what Brad Udall was talking about years ago, that higher temperatures mean less runoff. So as we move into the future and we start to think, well, things are okay, we got a good year, it's not clear how many more of these good years we're going to get. And as Meade elevations continue to fall, we're going to look to California to help stabilize that system. But looking to California means looking to IID. And looking to IID means if less water flows to IID, then it means again less water flowing to the Salton Sea, which means exacerbating this already bad situation. But what happens if the Salton Sea looks like this? In fact, the Salton Sea did look like this. Dust storms blew through there regularly. But when these negotiations for the DCP continue, and they look to IID to sign off on this, at the same time that 60 Minutes and any number of live bloggers and live streamers are out there saying, wow, this is what's going on. You guys want to give up more water? How's that going to sell? How are we going to get a DCP if we can't address this or this? Salton Sea, as it continues to shrink, means more birds and more dead fish. And you can be sure nothing sells the media better than this image of dying birds and dying fish. So they'll be out there next year. And they're going to say, oh, what's happening? How come nobody ever saw this coming? And what are we going to do about this? And where's the urgency to take some action? Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Mike has a serious side, as you see. Again, we'll hold questions to the very end. For example, Mike, I do want to get some clarification from you that your map seemed to suggest that 15 years from now, the Salton Sea would be comprised of tomato soup. Did I quote that right?
So if you look at South San Diego Bay and South San Francisco Bay, those salt ponds, they look like tomato soup. A lot of bacterial activity, so
I did
there
not
will
know
be
that.
some that will be attracted.
I keep learning a lot from you, Mike. All right, we will finish with Kevin Kelly. Kevin is the GM of the Imperial Irrigation District. He's been there for a decade at least now. His background, again, you should read the bios. The backgrounds are interesting to folks. He comes from a world of media and public affairs, a magazine publisher for a while, an editor, a writer, and so on. It's interesting the backgrounds that people have that come to this profession. If you read through all the bios, you'll see we have a few chemical engineering, a few folks with chemical engineering backgrounds, someone with an English lit background, someone that served on a nuclear submarine, someone whose dad was too funny to be president. It's a lot of interesting folks we have here, including Kevin Kelly. And if you Google Kevin, you'll find out that he held the World Boxing Commission featherweight title from 1993 to 1995, but you look a lot different than your picture, I must admit. But Kevin.
You're talking about the black boxer.
Yeah, I didn't think it was.
I do want to thank you, though, Doug, for sparing me the long version of your introduction. And I want to thank Mike and Bruce for being so stingy with their time. I think I've got a couple minutes left. I don't have a PowerPoint. I've been talking about the Salton Sea for what seems like a decade. But following Mike here today, I will not have to be the agitator, swinging for the fence. I'm the voice of reason. Jeff Keitlinger always tells me when I'm on a panel that I'm way too severe. So I'm not going to be. And I'm going to tell you about how we're on a course to at least making it through 10 years. And I'm going to defend a 10-year plan, because if you don't get the 10 years right, forget about the 75. So the Salton Sea, for me, unlike either Bruce or Mike, I'm from the Imperial Valley. I mean, when I was a boy, we used to fish at the Salton Sea. Used to water ski there. Now, it was never, this pristine blue lake that you hear about these, the halcyon days of the Lake Tahoe South. And it was always a pretty rugged place. But it's California's largest lake, even today. I think it may even be California's largest lake when it's smaller. But But something happened around the time of the nation's largest water transfers through the QSA. And that was that the state of California, I think the water agencies, I think everybody, sort of just decided that they would take the approach that the best way to deal with this problem at the Salton Sea was to work around it. So instead of working through it, they tried to figure out how to maneuver past it. And 15 years later, you can't punt anymore. So the way to make this an urgent matter, and I'm not advocating this. It's not pictures of the birds. It'll be pictures of kids, and they're kids with today already the highest incidence of respiratory illness in the state. These are people of color, arguably the most disadvantaged community in California. I grew up there. It's like the Salton Sea. It's a rugged place. But if you want to attach urgency to this problem, tie those water transfers to this problem at the Salton Sea. So the tension, the balance that we're trying to strike between, the water resiliency in the region and the need to move water, during this era of limits. That has to be measured against this yawning public policy problem at the Salton Sea. So the reason it's a 10-year time frame is because that's what IID argued for. You have to deal with the Salton Sea as it is. And there's a whole sort of coterie of people down in the region who want a Salton Sea as big as it was in the 1950s. They want to bring water up from the Sea of Cortez. Well, so let's just say that actually occurred. In the current water world in the West, if they manage to bring water up from another country, do you think it would go to the Salton Sea? I imagine old Jeff Keitlinger would try and take it. But even if he didn't, why would you waste time on that when you've got this existential threat in front of you today and you don't know about the next 10 years? So the reason it's 10 years is because that's what IID insisted on. And I'm glad that the state of California agreed to that. Now, the problem with the 10-year plan is the funding only goes for about 3. But just think of the Salton Sea as a prerequisite to IID, the largest irrigation district in the nation, largest single water user on the river, being able to participate in a Lake Mead elevation program, which is important to our water users and important to the river. About, I guess it was a month ago. So I've been doing this Salton Sea circuit for a long time, but I've so far managed to stay away from the Salton Sea. And about a month ago, I went out with a news crew on an airboat, and I think we launched somewhere around New River. And then we went on up all the way to Mullet Island, just miles and miles. And do you know, for the most part, we're tooling around on a foot of water? So just think of that. This mitigation water goes away 6 months. That'll be the first part of the lake bed exposed. So that was a surprise to me. It shouldn't have been, but the Salton Sea starts to recede rapidly, which is why we've said we've conceded at IID. It's going to necessarily be a smaller lake. It should be sustainable, and the toolbox, especially in a state like California, ought to include accessing the largest untapped geothermal resource in the world. 2,000 megawatts untapped in a state where the renewable portfolio standard's 50% today, and there's a bill in the legislature to make it 100. So you know, IID is an irrigation district, but we're also a public power provider, it's always seemed to me that as much as we talk about water energy nexus, the Salton Sea ought to be the climate proving ground for this this vaunted progressive state called California. So I'll close. There's not a whole lot I can add to what, although I will say that tomato soup, I think the first time I saw that, I wasn't GM. I was a press relations guy for IID. And at that time, at a policy level, our board was still in this, wink and a nod mode where, yeah, the Salton Sea was a problem, but, it'll take care of itself. And I think that was the dominant mindset. I became GM, my board changed, and, that has a concentrating effect on a staff person. And our attitude to the problem was, we're going to deal with it. We filed a petition to the State Water Board in 2014. Bruce used to work for us. State hired him. So the state of California seems to be doing something. It's not enough. It's too late. But thank God it's happening. And I'm a cockeyed optimist compared to Mike Cohen. So finally, I was any of you familiar with the Commonwealth Club? I think it goes back to the 1930s. It's in San Francisco. It's a public affairs organization. Well, they decided to do a Colorado River segment, and I was on the panel. I was on with Fran Spivey Weber, who at the time was a State Water Board member, and I can't remember his name, John Fleck, but the author of the Killing the Colorado. Yeah. So anyway, we did an hour and a half, and the San Francisco people are all, drinking wine and listening to us. And so we had this sort of back and forth on Salton Sea, which was just this sort of exotic place that down in the remote hinterlands. But it ended, and the moderator was just so, he couldn't believe that I'd come up from the Imperial Valley, and he figured that, I guess, by the way I looked, that I must have been a Republican, and he had everybody give me a hand. So the whole crowd starts clapping. And I stood up and bowed for him. I didn't have the heart to tell him I was a Democrat. But, you know, in my district, just being a Democrat, they think I'm a Maoist. But the Salton Sea is something is going to get done, and it won't be all that we want, but it will be all that is needed, because if it isn't, those people down there will stop transferring water. So just remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I promise that you have a chance to ask questions to this group, and you guys all have your lapel mics so you can stay put. So open it up for questions, right here.
Several of you gentlemen have mentioned geothermal and the potential of it. You've mentioned the importance of funding and the role of stakeholders. To what extent has consideration been given to trying to interest those who are looking at geothermal potential as being participating stakeholders and providing some funding to supplement the funding that Mr. Wilcox identified had been lined up thus far?
Well, Kevin probably knows much more about the geothermal than I do, but one of the things we are still trying to do, and are actually meeting in San Francisco next week with one of the geothermal companies, is to take a page out of the DRECP, the Desert Conservation Plan, and have a mitigation fund that those folks pay into when they develop something at the Salton Sea. So instead of building another 100-acre wetland someplace, they actually put that, what it would cost for that 100-acre wetland, in a fund. I don't, pardon me, don't know that that's going to generate a tremendous amount of money, but it helps, and it would. The more money we can get right now as we get started, the further ahead, and we can actually maybe catch up to some extent.
Yeah, let me just say, when we first started talking about this initiative where renewable energy would be synced up with restoration, that was our plan, that we'd turn that exposed lake bed into the world's largest renewable energy zone, and we'd add a surtax, an environmental surcharge, onto the generation. The problem is that with geothermal, it's already out of the market. It costs so much up front to develop the resource. It's a 24/7 baseload resource, as opposed to the intermittent solar and wind that have dominated the renewable market in California. So we simply we believe that it ought to be developed just as another means to hold the ground together, and the good that could come from that in addressing these two important public policy goals at the same time at this very beleaguered place.
Questions? Yep, in the back.
This question is just more or less for Kevin. Just wanted you to clarify something for me, if you could. When you were talking about growing up in the Salton Sea area, you mentioned a number of water transfer that occurred that didn't necessarily work with the existing environment. Could you just tell me like the years those occurred, or if you knew a couple of specific names of some major ones, what those would be?
So I either misspoke or you're too far away. There were no water transfers when I was a boy. I'm much too old for that. The water transfers, the phenomenon of agricultural to urban water transfers go back to the late 1980s in the Imperial Valley. And I think to date, we will be transferring up to 500,000 acre-feet a year between from the full suite of transfers. But one consideration, something I should have pointed out, this mitigation water that's going away, that was supposed to give the Salton Sea time, or the state time to figure out what to do with the Salton Sea. That 15 years, during that time, we have sent, through fallowing, up to 800,000 acre-feet of water to the Salton Sea, simply to maintain the status quo there. During a water drought, during a water crisis. So going forward, when that condition goes away, I expect there's going to be somebody that's going to show up at the State Water Board and say, ID, you need to keep doing it, right?
So people have gone up there and say, IID, you need to keep doing it.
Right, right. So if they do, that'll be a problem.
So I think this is, the conversation often turns to fallowing agricultural land or increasing efficiency within agricultural operations and transferring that water, which is, that's where the water is, to the urban sector as a way to address water problems in the West. But the Salton Sea is the poster child for externalities. What happens when you do that? Well, you can see in the Front Range a lot of by and dry and dried up towns. At Salton Sea, we see that on a much larger scale. We see human health impacts. We see ecological impacts. And those were essentially, at least back in 2003, the state of California said, we will backstop that deal. We will pay for those. And here we are, and they haven't been paid for. So the question is, as we look to the West, and how are we going to address our water problems in the West and the over-allocation of water in the Colorado River Basin, and people continue to talk about we're going to increase efficiency in agriculture and take that water away. You look to the Salton Sea, and people are going to say, I'm going to say, didn't work so well last time. How are you going to do it better in the next time?
We can do one more question if we have one. Or you could go next door and have drinks and snacks. So I think the vote is in. Well, thanks to our panel. And one of the things we do here is we have long breaks because we know that's often where the most important thing happens at conferences. You get to mingle with each other. So we will resume in about 30 minutes, straight up 10 o'clock. Thank you.